Have you ever made a choice driven by fear, only to regret it later? Fear can hijack our decisions, leading us down paths we never meant to take. Even Abraham, a giant of faith, wasn't immune. In Genesis 20, we see him stumble, not because he doubted God's promise, but because fear drowned out his trust. His story reminds us, faith isn't a straight climb, even the faithful falter. Yet God's faithfulness shines brightest in our weakest moments. When Abraham's fear led to failure, God responded not with condemnation, but with protection and restoration. This ancient story isn't about perfect people, it's about a perfect God who redeems our wrong turns. As we step into Abraham's story, let's see our own fears reflected and find hope in God's unwavering grace. Even when fear writes our script, God's hand is ready to turn the page. Abraham journeyed to Gerar, but as he entered this new land, old fears resurfaced, echoing in his mind like distant thunder. The unknown pressed in on him, and the weight of uncertainty grew heavier with each step. He looked at Sarah, his beloved companion, and, gripped by anxiety, repeated a past mistake. "She is my sister." The words slipped out, a reflex born of fear, not faith. Years earlier in Egypt, this same lie had nearly cost them everything. The memory of that close call lingered, yet, here he was, caught in the same snare. You'd think he'd learned, but fear has a way of erasing God's past faithfulness. In moments of panic, even the strongest memories of deliverance can fade. Abraham's half-truth was a whole lie, putting God's promise at risk as Sarah was taken into a foreign king's harem. The consequences of his fear rippled outward, threatening the future they'd been promised. The father of faith, acting out of fear, forgot the God who had always protected him. In his desperation, he lost sight of the one who had called him out of Ur and guided him through every trial. We all have our Gerar moments, times when old habits and fears resurface, tempting us to repeat past failures. No matter how far we've come, the familiar pull of old patterns can be strong. Pressure mounts, and the easy, familiar path calls. It's in these moments that our faith is truly tested, and our choices reveal what we trust most. Abraham's story is a mirror. Fear can erode faith, making us forget God's deliverance and doubt his protection. We see ourselves in his struggle, wrestling with the same doubts and insecurities. It's a sobering reminder that even the faithful can fall back into old patterns. None of us are immune to moments of weakness, no matter how strong our convictions. But God's story doesn't end with our mistakes. His faithfulness remains, shining through the darkest moments and offering hope when we falter. He meets us in our weakness, ready to redeem. Even when we stumble, his grace is greater than our failures. Our failures don't have the final word. With God, every faltering step can become a new beginning. Abraham's plan worked. His life was spared, but the cost was high. In his fear, he chose self-preservation over trust, and the consequences rippled outward. Sarah was taken by King Abimelech, swept into a world of uncertainty and royal intrigue, her future hanging in the balance. From a human view, disaster loomed. The promise God had made to Abraham seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse. Would everything unravel because of one fearful choice? But God intervened. That night, he appeared to Abimelech in a dream. "You are as good as dead because the woman you have taken is married." Divine warning pierced the darkness. Abimelech pleaded his innocence, desperate to make things right. God acknowledged his integrity, instructing him to return Sarah unharmed and sparing his household from harm. Then, God called Abraham a prophet, even in his failure. Despite Abraham's fear and mistakes, God's calling on his life remained unchanged. God didn't define Abraham by his mistake, but by his calling. He saw beyond the stumble to the purpose he had placed within him. While Abraham hid in fear, God protected Sarah and upheld his promise. Even when Abraham was powerless, God was actively working for their good. God's faithfulness wasn't dependent on Abraham's perfection. His love and commitment were never in question. He shielded Sarah, corrected Abimelech, and covered Abraham all at once. God orchestrated protection, correction, and restoration in a single act of grace. This is grace. God sees beyond our stumbles to who he's called us to be. He lifts us up, even when we fall short. Even when we're powerless to fix our mess, God steps in. He brings hope into our darkest moments and light into our confusion. He preserves his promise, not because we're flawless, but because he is. His word stands firm, anchored in his character. Abraham's failure became a stage for God's unwavering commitment. Our weakness is not the end of the story, it's where God's strength shines brightest. Our identity in God isn't erased by our worst moments. He calls us by name, not by our failures. He works through our weakness, not despite it. In our brokenness, His purpose moves forward. The covenant was never at risk, because God was always in control. His faithfulness is the anchor in every storm. His promise stands, even when we fall. In every season, His grace endures. Abimelech, shaken by God's warning, confronted Abraham at dawn. "What have you done to us? What were you thinking?" the king demanded. The man of faith was rebuked by a man of the world, a stunning reversal. Abraham tried to justify himself. "I thought there was no fear of God here. Besides, she really is my sister." But fear had distorted his reality and led him to rationalize his deception. Instead of owning his failure, Abraham minimized it, clinging to technicalities. This moment exposes how fear not only leads to bad choices, but also to self-justification. We blame circumstances, find excuses, and avoid responsibility. Abraham's honesty is raw, but incomplete. The lesson is clear. Fear twists our perspective and tempts us to defend our wrongs. True restoration begins when we stop justifying and start owning our failures. Only then can grace do its work. Despite Abraham's excuses and his lack of courage, Abimelech responded with unexpected grace and wisdom. Instead of reacting with anger or seeking revenge, he chose a path of peace and reconciliation. Abimelech returned Sarah untouched, gave Abraham generous gifts, and even offered him land. A remarkable gesture of reconciliation and restoration that went far beyond what was required. This act showed a deep desire to make things right, not just for himself, but for everyone involved. Abimelech also publicly restored Sarah's honor, ensuring that no shame or suspicion would follow her. In front of his people, he made it clear that she was innocent, protecting her dignity and reputation. God's intervention was complete. He had closed the wombs in Abimelech's household, but now, at Abraham's prayer, he healed them all. The entire community experienced relief and joy as God's mercy was poured out. The prophet, fresh from failure and humbled by his mistakes, became the agent of healing. Abraham's prayer was the turning point, showing that God can use us even when we feel unworthy. God used Abraham's prayer to lift the curse and restore life to Abimelech's household. Through prayer, brokenness was transformed into blessing. This is the stunning grace of God. He turns our messes and failures into testimonies of His power and love. Even when we falter, His grace shines brighter. The promise was never in danger. God's faithfulness secured it from beginning to end. His word stands firm, no matter how uncertain our actions may be. Restoration came not through punishment, but through grace, generosity, and prayer. Forgiveness and kindness paved the way for a new beginning. God's plan moved forward, undeterred by human weakness or mistakes. His purposes are never derailed by our shortcomings. Even our worst moments can become the soil for God's greatest work. Out of brokenness, new life and hope can spring forth. He restores what fear and failure threatened to destroy, rebuilding what was lost and healing what was wounded. The story ends not in shame, but in healing and reconciliation. God's promise stands, unbroken, and His grace writes a better ending than we could ever imagine. Abraham's detour in Gerar is packed with lessons for us. First, fear is a faith killer. It shrinks our view of God and magnifies our problems. Second, we all have default sins, old patterns we fall back into under pressure. Abraham's repeated lie warns us to stay vigilant and seek God's strength in our weak spots. Third, God's protection is unwavering. Even when we fail, He steps in to guard His promise. Our security rests not in our grip on God, but in His grip on us. Correction can come from unexpected places, even from those outside our faith. Abimelech's integrity rebuked Abraham's deceit, reminding us to stay humble and open to truth. God's wisdom isn't confined to the familiar. He can teach us through anyone. In every detour, God is at work, correcting, protecting, and restoring. Genesis 20 isn't about Abraham's failure or Abimelech's virtue, it's about God's unstoppable faithfulness. In the next chapter, Sarah gives birth to Isaac, The promise is fulfilled not because Abraham was perfect, but because God is. Our failures don't disqualify us from God's grace. He calls fearful people prophets, uses flawed prayers to heal, and guards his covenant through our mess. If you're haunted by past mistakes, remember, your story isn't over. God's promises rest on his character, not your performance. He meets us in our mess, not with shame, but with restoration. Choose faith over fear. Let go of self-justification and rest in his grace. His promise is greater than your panic. His plan is bigger than your problems. His love will never fail. Trust him, he's already written the ending.